Calm down before you stress up the groove. The energy a little different.
Hello and welcome to another honest conversation, and this time we're going to be talking about early careers, and it's an exciting topic because it's such a crucial part of talent in any corporate. So I'm Serena Palmer. I'm the owner of Serena Consulting, where we focus on everything leadership, talent, equity, diversity and inclusion. And I'm joined by my wonderful friend Viv Meredith, who is a partner at Positive Momentum. And Viv, I'll hand to you. Would you like to say a little bit about who you are and maybe where you've come from?
Hi, Serena. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you on this conversation. So I've had a corporate career focused on HR, people and organisation, spent quite a bit of my career at AstraZeneca, followed by GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, and then latterly Anglo-American. I have been independent now for about 18 months. And this is a topic area very close to my heart from my corporate days, but also from a independent perspective, just like you.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, much like many of these conversations, you and I have spoken about this topic before. And so it's something that we've had a lot of curiosity around. And also, I think from both of our perspectives, we've been part of the early careers talent segments in lots of different organizations, whether directly or indirectly, it's sort of featured around our work. And this conversation came from us really questioning what's going on with early careers at the moment, and does it feel like things might need to change? And I think it would be a great place to start if perhaps the two of us sort of think about the last sort of 15, 20 years. It's become the norm in particularly large corporates to have a really systematic graduate program where they're probably taking an annual intake and then more recently an apprenticeship program. And this has been sort of rumbling on for quite some time. And it certainly feels to me that there's been little change in the early careers sort of program approach, and maybe an opportunity to pause and look at why are we doing it and what is it that we're trying to get? What are your thoughts in that from that perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a really fair point, Serena, and I'm just thinking of it, from personal experience, because I think there's so much variety, isn't there? And I'm sure there's lots of people who are listening to us who've, put quite a lot of effort into staying current and experimenting in this space, as well as you say, probably, some organisations who, this may be an opportunity to start thinking about doing something different. I suppose from my experience, as you say, the most successful programs I've seen are where we have had the opportunity to do some experimentation and refresh annually. So where the organisation is welcoming of some experimentation. And some sorts of examples of that, from my point of view, would be, I'm thinking about one of the organisations that I was accountable for early careers in. We really focused the apprentice and graduate intake on the upcoming new capabilities that we needed.
Yeah.
So homing in on, say, digital, homing in on, say, particular elements of science, homing in on, say, analytic, scientific skills, where we could then use the early career agenda to show that we were growing and wanting to do something different, rather than maybe leveraging it to those programs to do the common things or the core capabilities and foundations of the company. I don't know whether that's something that you've got a view on or something sort of different.
Well, I think, first of all, taking a step back in an organisation and looking at what are the skills of the future that perhaps I don't have or don't have enough of, and then sort of scanning across the talent landscape and thinking, well, actually, graduates coming into the organisation are ideal to bring some of those future skills. And at such an early stage of their career, we are able to, as an organisation, be able to shape and mould what those roles look like in the future. And I think that's a really refreshing approach. In my experience, all too often, and I think, perhaps controversially, it doesn't apply to everyone, but all too often I see really high talent in terms of grads with open eyes and really wanting to be part of the future of the workforce, becoming sort of put into the roles which are easier to fill with limited accountability and scope for experimentation. And because of that, they start to lose that sparkle over time. You know, when we sell in a grad program, we sell it big. You know, there's a lot of money goes into attraction campaigns, right? And all too often the same mistakes are made, and they are usually around either there isn't a role for that graduate to be in, and it's a sort of mashup of various different bits and pieces from other people's roles, and they're seen as like an assistant, or we're selling them into something where there is limited scope and a very rigid accountability for what we expect in that role. And what you start to see is the enthusiasm and excitement disappearing over time. And I guess that brings me to an interesting point. Some time ago, I wrote an article which said, you know, early careers, particularly graduate leavers who leave at the end of their 2 or 3 year program, 60% of those go into a role which is at the same level or below. And so therefore you have to question, why were they leaving the company in the first place? It clearly wasn't motivated by money or hierarchy. It was motivated by something else. And I wonder, when I look at those statistics, is it because we've given them limited scope, or is it company culture or leadership?
Such a great statistic, actually, and it, you know, really makes me think about another sort of angle but with a similar sort of vein to it. It's also about sort of not putting people into boxes, isn't it? So, you know, if we think about the options that might be available, so direct entry graduates, you know, that might be the right route for you know, some people coming into the workforce. Graduate scheme, yeah, maybe, you know, the right route for some people. Apprenticeship, maybe the right route. And I think there's also this sort of balance in looking at what is the, you know, what is the right fit, you know, for an individual, and how can the company embrace all of those options and value them all. So one experience that I'm thinking about is actually that, you know, not all companies, I don't think all companies look at direct entry graduates in the same way as graduate scheme entries. And when you start to, now with the benefit of people data, the way we can actually have a look at, you know, very, very easily, transparency of our workforce, it's actually quite surprising how often, you know, there are people who have come into the workforce with a degree, but they just haven't come through, say, the you know, the graduate program route. And I think it's about ensuring that they can feel as strong and as supported and can grow just the same way as something that might feel a little bit more elite, like a graduate program.
Yeah. And I think that then takes me into a different sort of part around any of the early careers programs, whether it's an apprenticeship program scheme, grad program scheme, which is, you know, support is so essential, and getting that right can be quite difficult. And one of the areas I always sort of ponder around is how much consideration to line managers are organizations making, and this can be really, really difficult. Certainly I reflect on some of my experiences when I was running early careers programs, which is the accelerated rate of change. So because a graduate program or a scheme takes quite a long time in the running, it's a long process to get those individuals in, by which point those line managers may have changed, been promoted or moved teams, etc. And yet you're still allocating that person to that role, and they end up with a line manager who perhaps is not a good fit. And, you know, I've certainly been part of conversations with line managers who really, really struggle with, why aren't these early careers employees behaving in a way that they would have if they were in their early 20s, for example. You know, and there is a real struggle sometimes, I find, with giving individuals the right level of guidance around how we operate in a big corporate, but also what do we learn from those early careers employees. And I think line managers struggle with this. What's your experience, Viv, in terms of what does good look like for supporting early careers employees versus line manager support?
It's a really, really good point that you raised, Serena, and I think there's a couple of things. It's making me think about some experiences. I was lucky enough to be a non-exec director on a multi-academy trust school, and with 10 schools, and really sort of getting a sense of, from the sixth form perspective, what it feels like when you're making those career choices, to go to uni, take apprenticeships, what that means afterwards. And it was very, very recently, I was lucky enough to get involved in some work with Tech UK on looking at the curriculum of the future from a tech perspective. And so with those two experiences, I think a line manager needs to think a little bit differently, and I'm putting myself in these shoes when I've needed to take that line management role, which is to stand in the shoes of those individuals coming in. We know that many of the people coming into the workforce now, they were educated through the COVID period. They did not have the opportunity for the interaction, the experiences, the pressure of exams. The experience was very, very different. And then those individuals coming into the workforce are going to come in with a different experience than maybe the generation before that. We know that the curriculum needs to shift. We know that the half-life of learning is so much shorter. So everything we're learning in school, is out of date, so much quicker than it used to be. So how do we help, from a line manager perspective, stand in those shoes and think, what is it I'm going to bring that individual to be the best in class? How do I start with them and come across the bridge with them, rather than just have high expectations based on whatever it was that I experienced, or my experience of line management that cannot be projected onto the now. So I think that kind of flexibility, that willingness to stand and understand and help bring people across the bridge is what I think makes a successful line manager.
Yeah. And I think some brilliant points in there, Viv, that the COVID generation are now in the workforce and nobody really knows what that means, but we kind of have to be ready to be able to flex and to do things differently. And then you also mentioned that some line managers do really struggle with the sort of like, my experience was X, why are they not behaving in that way? And, the honest answer in that for me is not everybody is the right line manager for an early careers employee. And I don't think that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's not everybody, we're not always suited to be able to do everything. And so really considering what the experience is and the line manager support for early careers is absolutely critical. And it makes me reflect on a case where I was trying to help an individual who had joined an organisation on the apprenticeship scheme. They were in a location in the south of the UK, whereas the head office was in the north. The location that they were working in was a sort of remote hybrid type of office, and yet because the apprenticeship scheme dictates that apprentices must be visible and present in an office, they had to go in all the time. They were quite often the only person in the office. Their line manager was based in the north, and almost seemed to have forgotten that they had an apprentice. They were, once again, all the sort of potential pitfalls were happening here. They didn't have a defined role. They were there to help out, which, that whole sort of, I don't know, I guess, slightly cynical look of about there to make the cup of tea, right? We thought we'd moved on past that, but perhaps we haven't, because that's really what's happening is, do a bit of this, do a bit of that. And the long story short was, they were getting really bad performance reviews, mostly in terms of criticising their lack of networking and communicating with other people. And of course, if you consider what the mindset will be of that individual who's literally just left education, who's very young, inexperienced, and doesn't know what office life is like, often working alone and not really knowing what they're supposed to be doing, how do we expect them to be reaching out and networking and etc., etc.? So, it brings me back to, there is a skill set really when it comes to being a line manager for somebody on the early careers route. So real consideration there, I think, right?
So Serena, points really well made. Another angle that's sort of coming to my mind, and there's two sort of pieces to this, and I'd just be curious to hear your thoughts. One of them is I'm a real kind of strong believer in starting to get to a place where it's about careers, not early careers. Yeah. And I think, the more we think about work of the future, the fact that we put a little bit of effort in for a couple of years, so to speak, with a scheme, does that still have value? Is that the way to go? Or actually, is it more about what we do to support careers and growth through the whole life cycle of an individual, particularly when we think about it, from the point of view that we're going to constantly have to reskill. So I'm more and more coming to a place where it's about what do you do across whole careers, and intervening across whole careers. That's more important, because is a couple of years and then into the mix actually a model that still has value. So great to hear your thoughts on that, and then I've got another one for you. And when you reflected on that one,
we'd have so much to say here, Viv. So I think excellent point. It's about looking at an employee life cycle, and there's a few things I would chuck in there. Yes, I think it is about careers, and I think some of the dozen early careers program in that way for 2 or 3 years still serve us well in the very agile changing workforce that we've got at the moment. We often don't know what skills we need, but we know we haven't got them. So utilizing people in their earlier stage of their career with a more agile career pathway and the right level of support, I love it. I think it really enables some of that creative, experimental thinking that you mentioned earlier. So how do we utilize these individuals to the maximum for skills we're building in the future? I think that's a wonderful point. The second thing is, you just briefly touched on there, is this sort of programmatic approach. And that I do feel is becoming more and more of an issue, because it's so expensive, it's so time heavy and resource heavy to run a big hefty program like that. And it's never moved away from this cliff edge moment, which again, I think really doesn't serve people well, regardless of who you are and what age you are. If you have 2 or 3 years experience of being in a sort of very comfortable cohort, loads of support, development, lots of social activities, and then this cliff edge. And actually, that moment is one of the most critical moments in any human being's career, which is where you really take a look at where is it you want to spend your time and energy. And I think that is the investment of development. So yes, we've had a nice route through, there'll be bumps along the road, but at that pivotal moment, investing in real career development coaching or some very deliberate development support for individuals at that point, I think is really game changing. That's my response to that. Over to your second point.
Oh, no, that's fantastic. Thank you. And I'm going back actually to one of the things you were saying, which is about this sort of, the world we're in now, which is a flexible world where remote working is the norm. We are seeing obviously challenges about the tensions of, coming back into office, not, the positive, negative consequences of that. But one of the things that I've sort of, you made me think about was, for a couple of clients that I've been working with, one of the observations that's come out, and I'm feeling this, and I'm not knowing quite yet what the solution is, but we have to find one, which is it was okay for us. We were in the office and the generations before us were there. So, through osmosis in the office, we could learn things, we could overhear things, we could ask a quick question, we could chat to people at the coffee machine, we could just, comfortably ask. Now, much of that generation are enjoying, where it's possible, the flexibility to sometimes not be in the office. And more I'm hearing clients talk about, it's okay if that suits me, but what's that doing to the people who are coming through? What's that doing for the people who need to learn through osmosis and be around and have a comfortable place? And sometimes we say, oh, technology is a really good way of overcoming this. You know, they can just drop a Teams message, or they can just get a hold of me. It's really not a problem. But is that the best way for individuals to learn? And I'm curious whether you've had some similar experiences, because I'm not sure what the right answer is, because there has to be a balance, and we have to think about the great opportunity that flexible working brings. But equally, how do we win, you know, for the future generations as well, to have some of the luxury that we had, which is to learn through others in multiple ways.
Yeah. And I think that that's so interesting from a complete workforce culture perspective. Nobody really knows what they are supposed to be doing with regards to hybrid working, presenteeism, you know, and there's all sorts of wrestling with 2 days or 3 days in the office, you know, that kind of thing. And I think if we strip it all down, the bits that are missing are those accidental learning opportunities, are the opportunities to be exposed to people we respect, admire, maybe we kind of, from a seniority perspective, we really, you know, being able to see those people as human beings, and also building relationships that are friendships as well as, you know, working relationships. And I think that is an element of, you know, deliberate support for anybody coming into the workforce now, whether you're on an early careers pathway or if you're just somebody who took a career break. The world of work looks really, really different. Who's in the office? Is everybody out on a Friday? All of those sorts of things. So I think deliberate opportunities is, I hate saying this because it sounds so cheesy, but deliberate opportunities for exposure to senior leaders, deliberate opportunities for networking and relationship building are really vital, but doing it in a way that doesn't make people, it's really, I don't know what the answer is. Do you know what I mean? Like doing it in a way where it's not, you know, Cake Thursday and everybody has to pretend that they're coming in for cake. It's, you know, it's being really open and honest. What we're missing at the moment are human connections, accidental learning, relationship building, inspiration from each other, and support, you know. And so it's okay to say to people, this is what we want you to do on a Wednesday or a Thursday. And yes, we might throw cake in, but it's not, let's not market it as come in for cake. Let's just market it as come in because I think it's really important.
You know, it's so great. The two words that now have stuck in my mind, and I'm going to come back to the one that's more serious. But you know, when somebody says, like, don't think about an elephant, and then all you can do is, now all I can think about is cake and how much I really would like some cake. But your word deliberate, I think that is a really important element here. When or how do we get to a place where it is deliberate and required that we give back to the next generations rather than purely satisfy the requirements of our own role? So, you know, I guess you and I working in this space, you know, we've always had a mindset which is about one eye on the next generation all the time. Sometimes both, when, you know, given the roles that we've done. It's the now, but it's also the next generation, and that is the kind of norm. But I'm wondering what that's looking like now in this new environment, and whether we are being deliberate enough about giving accountability and setting expectations and performance expectations and leadership expectations around that future eye, you know, eye on the future as well as eye on now. And yes, please, can I have some cake?
Yeah, exactly. I think you really touched on something there. So I guess, Viv, because I know we will easily talk about this until the cows come home, but we should probably start thinking about, from this conversation, from the clients you interact with and I interact with, and all of that experience in this field and knowledge, where would you get to, if I'm going to ask you the impossible question, how would you boil down your thinking around an organization who is ready to do something different in this space? What are the things that you would sort of throw at them to start with?
Wow. Okay, let's give that a go. So I'll try and go for three things. So number one, I think careers rather than early careers. So have a think about how whatever you're doing at that stage of career life you can roll through with, so we don't end up, as you say, with this sort of programmatic effect. And if we have a programmatic effect, think about it across all life stages and career stages, not just early. Second one, I think, is how do we build in continuous learning, and where are the expectations given, you know, the future of work, given some of the challenges we're having, you know, putting in place the workforce that we need for the future and ensuring people have the right skills. How do we point some of these early career interventions at those, you know, newer skill sets that we require? Third one, I think, is recognizing that early career individuals are coming in from a very, very different context than we experienced, or even the generation before them experienced. So what is it we need to help them with in terms of some of their transferable skills as well? The big three that stand out to me, which we've not touched on yet: problem solving. How do we really aid people to work through great problem solving? Judgment. You know, there's so much more technology enabled augmentation, AI, that allows us to kind of take a bit of a lazier route, you know, to accessing knowledge. But how do we encourage judgment across that? And then the third one is brilliant decision making and situational decision making. Things are always much more complex than when people come into their early, you know, come into an organization. The sort of world looks simpler, and really helping those people who are going to accelerate through the organization to understand the situation, the complexity, and have that sort of situational awareness for decision making, because they're likely to become decision makers maybe quicker because of the route they've come into the organization. So they would be my three quick top of the head ones. How about you?
Yeah, God, I think you've said some amazing things. I would probably build with, you know, utilize experimentation. This is a great audience to really harness what, you know, they have so much better access to technology. They've grown up with it in their hands. For people of my age and older, or, you know, we've had to learn, right? But this is an entirely different generation, and that experimental art of the possible, I think, is a really good thing to lean into. And if that's something that your company is looking at, future, you know, future skills, you've talked about decision making being one of them. I also think how to lead in this digital age is really interesting. And, you know, what is it that these employees will bring already some knowledge of that, and how do we unlock what that looks like and then accelerate it? So I think definitely the art of the possible, experimentation, it's a great way to look at it. I love taking away early careers and looking at career. I think that's just, you know, such a refreshing approach. And I think the final build I would put on it is, if you're willing to invest and spend lots of money on what has been traditional programs, which, you know, like we said before, are really costly and a lot of heavy lifting, maybe look at diverting some of that investment in different, more creative ways, and particularly around the support service around those individuals, so that you get the best from them. And that mindset of changing that mindset, particularly from leaders, instead of thinking, why aren't they behaving? Why don't they want what I've got? Why don't, you know, well, actually they don't. You know, you said it earlier, Viv, they don't necessarily want to be working until midnight, sending emails, you know, at midnight saying, you don't have to reply to this, but, you know, blah, blah, you know, they'll be looking at that thinking that I don't want that as my future. Actually, I have a different idea, and that's okay. We've got to move with that. It will happen anyway. So getting on the front foot, I think, with that. Yeah. It's really hard, isn't it? The two or three things, there's lots of different things. But I think, you know, it's a really interesting topic to explore. I really appreciate all of your thoughts and experience here, Viv, because I think both of us really want to see some interesting change coming along. And it's okay to experiment in organizations. And I think that's another thing. And I always used to say that, you know, as a leader in HR, I would say it all the time to my teams. It's better to say, you know, we're going to give this a go. This is an experiment. As soon as you use that language, it gives permission for failure. And failure is all right. That's how we learn. You know, you don't have to come up with a solution that's fit for the next 10 years. it can be fit for now, and we'll see what happens and adjust along the way. So I think that's probably what I would hope that people will lean into, that's all right, try something new. Yeah.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me onto the conversation with you. As you say, there's so many more angles to go at, but I hope, yeah, we've managed to put a few thoughts across. And thank you again for inviting me.
Definitely.
Serena.
And where can we find you, Viv? If somebody wants to reach out and get in touch, what's the best method to do that?
Oh, thank you. So it's vivian.meredith@positivemomentum.com, or there is a website also available there. But thanks, Serena, obviously through LinkedIn.
Yeah, everything's on LinkedIn. Yeah, perfect. Well, it's been great to chat. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.